Paint this fire hydrant and become a watercolor whiz. So the two colours I'm going to use to paint this fire hydrant are Cadmium Red Deep by Winsor & Newton and Cerulean Blue by Winsor & Newton, and they sit approximately opposite each other on the colour wheel. Also, I'm going to be using a size 6 flat brush. It's also about, say, half an inch big, and a size 6 round brush. Those are the only two tools I'm going to be using for that. In the paint along pack, you've got your printable image and the grayscale, plus you get the outline as well. So once you've got your outline down on the paper, we can make a start. So first of all, I'd like to get quite a bit of water into the middle well of my palette here, so that I can mix up a nice amount of the Cadmium Red Deep. And this is a good way for you to judge how much pigment you need, how big a puddle you need in order to fill a space, fill the size of your subject, whatever that is. I think I'll need more than that, so I'm just squirting some more water in. Best to have more rather than running out midway through. Maybe a little bit more just in case. So what we want to do at this stage is put red all over the fire hydrant. That should be enough there now. So all I'm going to do is paint this red all over the fire hydrant. You're welcome to follow along to this free tutorial as best you can, but if you'd like a little bit of extra help and you'd like the paint along pack, then you can click the link in the description or the information card that's on the screen now and become a patron of mine, and then you'll get all the paint along packs for free, which includes the outline, the grayscale, the supplies lists and instructions on how to proceed and everything like that. You'll get those free every time I do one of these Watercolor Whizz tutorials. Also, they'll be ad free. You'll be watching them on my Patreon site and you won't have the adverts sort of interrupting you as you paint. So if you'd like to get that, then please feel free to click the link and find out more. And just to show you, the paint along pack looks like this. So it's usually 3 sheets of A4 with all the information that will help you do a really good job of our project. So I'm just getting this red all over the hydrant. I'm leaving the bottom end a little bit sort of scruffy as if it's sitting in the grass or something like that. Not too worried about that. And I'd call this mixture, this strength, I'd say it's a pigmented wash, okay? And I'm painting on dry paper, and the paper is 100% cotton rag. It's by Two Rivers. It's handmade paper from England, and it's about 200 pounds in weight. And it's got a slight tooth to it. It's got a bit of a, what we call a knot surface, or a cold pressed surface. I've simplified parts of the fire hydrant a little bit just to make it easiest for us to whiz through, but you can go as detailed as you like. I just want to show you the procedure. There are a few little bolts sort of hanging down from the cover there. And I'm going to very delicately paint the red chains in now as well. They're basically just a loop shape nothing too fussy. Okay, so now I've got some puddling of paint occurring in the top of the fire hydrant, so I'm going to bring it down, share it out into the main body of the hydrant so I don't get any back runs. And in a few seconds the paint will have soaked into the paper, and that will be avoided. We won't have any back runs happening then. So just to show you the sort of moisture that we've got at the moment, you can see that shine there? It's very moist, isn't it? And I want to add some shadow colour, but it's way too moist to add that shadow colour. So I'm going to stay on camera and show you just how long that you need to wait sometimes for the shine, for the surface water to go off the paper. You can get into the actual fibres of the paper, but just leave enough shine so that it's still moist enough for us to drop in some nice believable shadow colour. So as you can see, I'm still moving this around to help the paint sink in consistently, evenly all over the whole of the fire hydrant. While we're just waiting a few seconds for that to soak in, let's look at our grayscale image, which has been posterised as well and simplified. So mostly we've got sort of this mid-grey, and then we've got a very dark grey, almost a black. And we've got some slightly paler highlights there. So overall our hydrant is sort of a mid-tone. But what I want to do when it is moist like this is I want to drop in some of those really strong shadows, because that will help us define the form on the fire hydrant, okay? But as I say, I'm still waiting because it's still too wet. I just want you to see how wet it is. You can tell it's too wet, look, because if you tip it, you'll get, see that puddle there? The puddle right on the dome of the fire hydrant? I mean, that tells me there's way too much. You can see it's travelling up and down. Way too much surface water on this fire hydrant. And watercolour is all about timing, and it's all about the moisture of the paper. So I think it's because it's quite a rainy day. You can hear the rain outside on the attic window. It's quite a rainy day and it's cool, so it's taking longer to soak in than usual. But watercolour, it won't be hurried, so I'm going to stay here on camera with you until it's soaked in to the condition that I know is perfect for dropping in colours, okay? So don't be tempted to rush this, because you'll just end up with a sloppy mess and all the shadow colour will bleed everywhere and bleed too far, okay? Every so often I'm tipping it a little bit here and a little bit there to help with this sort of soaking in of the paint. While we've got a few minutes, some of you might be wondering, well, this isn't stretched paper, is it? Why haven't I stretched my paper? Well, because Two Rivers paper is very well sized. There's a lot of gelatin sizing inside and outside of the paper, and it tends not to buckle a lot. So for these little Watercolor Whizz exercises, I don't take the effort to stretch my paper, but stretching paper generally is a good thing because you don't want paper that buckles. If you use a lighter weight paper, this is quite thick, see? If you use a lighter weight paper, it's going to buckle a lot more than the heavier weight papers. Still got a while to soak in. Nearly getting there now, won't take too long. Right, while we're waiting for this to soak in, we can start now to get our colour mixture ready. So I'm going to clean that colour out of there so I can show you exactly how much I would mix, you know, strength wise for these shadows on the red fire hydrant. So basically what I'd do is I'd bring in a few, maybe 2 brushfuls of water. That might be a bit too runny actually, but we'll see. A dab of the red paint. Dab or 2. It's still not strong enough for me. Again, go in small increments and judge, because we want this shadow colour to be darker than the red that's on the paper, and so far, you know, I need a bit more. Now into that red I'm going to pick up small increments of cerulean blue, and you'll notice the cerulean blue, which is opposite cadmium red deep on the colour well, will neutralise like that and give us a lovely colour, a lovely shadow colour. I'm just going to mix some more red. I mean, essentially we want the shadow to be based in red because the fire hydrant is red, and we need our shadow to be believable. Okay, so that's my shadow colour there. What I'm going to do now, because I can see that we've still got some puddles there, but generally it's soaked in quite well, what you can do is come along with a thirsty brush. That's a brush that's been moistened and then dried on a towel, and just hoover up. So it sucks up any excess puddles, and you can wipe that in a cloth and then come and hoover up the rest. I think it's so cool today. We'll be here waiting a very long time, and I've got to do this video for you. So what I said still stands true. Try and, you know, be patient and wait for the water to soak in, because the condition we want is what we've got now. See that shine there? That's the surface, that's the moisture we want in order to be able to paint the shadow in now, and it won't bleed too far. So to put the shadow in, let's have a look at our shadow grayscale. So basically, let's follow it. I'm following where I can see the darkest tone there on this fire hydrant. Some under there. I'm loading my brush up each time and dropping a good dollop of this shadow colour where I can see it on my grayscale. Can you see the form very, very slightly? The form is starting to emerge, isn't it? There's a bit more under there. There's a little bit of a shadow under that central nut that holds the chain. There's a bit of a shadow under there as well. See a very subtle form emerging. And this is nice practice for you to see how you can delicately and gradually build the form in watercolour. There's a bit of shine there, so let me just move that out of the way and move it up. That's better. So basically that's our first sort of application of colour. I want to let everything dry now, and then we will come and do some more work on it. So I'll see you in the next clip. Wait till it's bone dry. This could take about half an hour or more. Over an hour on a very damp day in Wales, and finally my fire hydrant is dry, and can you see already we've got some nice subtle shadows and some foam coming on the fire hydrant. So what I'm going to do now is, again, this is bone dry. I did actually give it a little bit of a hair dry on the back of the paper as well, so that when I do my next lot of work I'm not working on damp paper, because that's always going to cause us problems. So what I'm fancying doing now is, before I add the final dark shadows in, let's just pull out a few of these highlights that are on the sort of right hand side of the fire hydrant. To do that, I've got my sort of 1/2 inch flat brush, which I'm going to moisten really well. So with this brush I've moistened it and I've dried it, and now it's going to suck up some colour for me. So where I'd like to drag out the highlights, I just work away at the paint. I'll turn it over now and use the other side of my corner of my brush because that's clean. Just wipe out some highlights, and you can see we're getting right back almost to the white of the paper. See? I'll just zoom in for you. I'm going to rinse my brush now because I've picked up a lot of red paint. Rinse your brush each time after you've done a wiping session, and then dry it again on your towel cloth. Now along the ridges here there's some highlights, so let's wipe those away as well. Your brush must be very well wiped, because what can happen is if your brush is too moist, this rubbing action will cause back runs if you come in with a sploshy wet brush. where else? There's some highlights here. So basically wherever you can see highlights in this grayscale image that you've got in your paint along pack, okay? Rinse often and dry well. Rinse and dry, that's all we're doing, okay? Then this little bit's got a highlight on it. And doing these highlights makes the idea, gives us the idea of roundness and gives a bit more detail on the fire hydrant, okay? Now I want to give the idea of curve here, so there's very slight highlights there, but I'm gonna exaggerate them a bit. So I'm gonna wipe out quite a generous arc on this right hand crescent of the fire hydrant. See, it needs a few goes to dislodge the paint and start dissolving the paint. It might not come off immediately because it's had time to dry. Now there's a bit of a highlight on this sort of central knob as well. So arc it round, arc it round. You've got that. See the foam starting to come now? And let's just have a little bit of a tiny bit of highlight on this front little, the nut that's holding everything in place. For I can't really see any highlights on this bit apart from that very faint line there, but so I'm going to use artistic license and I'm just going to lift out some strokes of pale areas. See, my brush was a bit wet there and it's like bleeding a bit too much. Make sure you dry your brush really well on the cloth. Let's go down and lift out some highlights just about there. I'm dragging it acrossways so that it blends a bit more. Okay, see the highlights now forming? You're getting the feel of a fire hydrant. Let's have some more on this. There's like a rim at the bottom of the post. I'll have a highlight out of that. I'm not going to put any in the shadow. Okay, we're going to leave all of the left hand side in the shadow. Let's just keep the light to the right. Just have a bit more of a highlight here on the base and coming round a little bit on this curve around the base. Do that again because it's looking a bit still not pale enough for me, so I'm taking it out more out. Okay, now to indicate some of the chains, what I'm going to do is pretend that there's some little white ticks, just some glints of light on this central chain that's hanging down in the middle of the fire hydrant. So very small, you can see them just about there if I zoom in now. Very small detail, not a lot. And a bit of a highlight on this main sort of clasp that's coming from around this nut and bolt in the centre. So a highlight there. For Watercolor Whizz I stick to just 2 brushes, so I am limited to how much detail I can do. I limit it to 2 brushes to keep everything simple, but of course you at home, you can use whatever brushes you like if you want to get more detail in. So a hydrant's coming out. How about now finally some really dark, stronger shadows there on the left hand side. So to do that, we're going to go back to our 2 colours again, cadmium red deep and cerulean blue. I'm going to pick up some cadmium red. Brush full of water, just to dilute it a bit. Then some cerulean blue, and I want this to be a bit darker than the shadow that's already on there, so a bit more pigment of the blue, a bit more pigment of the red, and that's going to be stronger now, a bit more blue. Again, all of this batting back and forth will help your artist's eye get good at judging the strength of your shadows. Only you can do this, there's no shortcut to this, okay? So that's my shadow colour, perhaps a bit more blue. Now, what I need to do is be putting this colour on and be prepared to then come in quickly and soften it. So, see that shadow going under there? All where we can see the dark under the hydrant there. I'm going to paint over those bolts actually, because they would be dark. And that shadow goes out onto the shoulder. So again, I'm looking at my grayscale as my roadmap, and I'm painting all the things that I can see that are darker. If you want, you can paint these shadows in a little bit and leave a bit of a margin of the previous shadow areas showing, so that you've got the contrast of that as well, which is nice. You'll have 3 layers of shadow then. There's a little bit of shadow up here as well. Maybe we'll put a little bit there. See how it's starting to come together? Now there's a few concentric rings here, so I'm going to put a few of them in. There's a bit of dark under that bolt that's sticking out as well. Where else? The shadow comes across a lot wider than I've actually put it on, but I'm letting some of my previous shadow wash show through, so it's still giving us the idea of shadow, enough shadow under there. Let's go around there. Shadow. Bit more under that rim. There's a few little cast shadows from these bolts actually on the base of the pedestal of the hydrant. Oh, sorry, that was off camera then. And just a few more shadow lines down, like that. And there's our red fire hydrant. So I hope you've enjoyed painting this red fire hydrant for Watercolor Whizz. There are about 4 others currently in the playlist for this, and the playlist is at the end of this video. So if you want to do the others, then feel free to have a go at them. They're good for getting you to have simple skills and to give you confidence by doing small projects. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next instalment of Watercolor Whizz.